Guys, I need an audio check, please. Hold on, one sec. Audio check, please. I apologize about the air conditioning sound. It's in excess of 110 degrees here in downtown Gilbert. There's no way I can stream from the park like I wanted to. My phone would overheat. I'm using a microphone. I'm inside my car. The air conditioner is going. Please let me know if you can hear all right. If the air conditioner is not a problem, am I too loud? Let me know before we get started, please. But as long as everyone can hear me okay, slight AC noise background, not bad. Let's see if I can fix that a little bit. Alan Pierce, Migsy, and no one. Everyone else, welcome. This is the second part of our reading of the entire Department of Justice. Much better, thank you. Okay, make sure. Is my microphone too loud in any way? It's pretty. It's like right on my neck. I'm not experienced with microphones. Is there any chance that it's going to be too loud or too annoying? Looks all right. So, guys, I'm going to try to keep my personal comments to a minimum. I failed last time. I'm going to try to just power through this, and I'm going to be turning the chat off so that I can read. There's a whole bunch of reasons why I'm doing this. Check out the first part, the beginning of part 1. I explain why this is even worth the time. Good. We need more. We need as many people as possible talking about this. I think this report is very important because I think it shows not just what's happening at Phoenix PD. I think what's happening at Phoenix PD is happening in most police departments in the United States, to be honest with you. We left off last time on page. Guys, by the way, really quick check. Can you see my screen? Can you see the document on my screen? Or are you looking at the chat window like I'm looking at? What are you looking at? What do you see? Tell me what you see. Hey, wait, I can click on a preview and see what I see. It looks like I see the chat window with the little bars and everything like you guys. Wait, can you guys even see me switching over to the preview? This is wild. First step towards consent decree. Yeah. I've been absolutely shocked with the response from the city leaders and the police leaders. But before we get started, I just want to make sure you guys can read along with me. So let me know, please, that you're able to see the document at least behind the chat window. And now you should just see the document. Please confirm. See your small screen. Do you see the investigation of the city of Phoenix and the Phoenix Police Department report? Right now? And do you see me scrolling? Sorry for the technical issues, guys. I wanted to just it's too small. Okay, thanks, guys. I just wanted to make sure that you can read, or at least see what I'm seeing. And we left off on page 34. If it's too small, I apologize. I'm gonna put this at a size that I can read it, and hopefully if you need to zoom in, you're able to zoom in somehow. Control, if you're you could pinch and zoom maybe, or control plus nobody's using a computer, forget it. Anyway, let us begin. This is where we left off. Page 34. Phoenix police uses unreasonable force against handcuffed people. Phoenix PD officers use gratuitous force after a person is already handcuffed or restrained, and when there is no immediate threat. This often occurs after a person criticizes the officer for using force. This is unlawful. Force used only to punish an individual typically violates the Fourth Amendment. For example, Phoenix PD officers painfully restrained a man because he kicked an officer during an arrest. When officers spotted the man, he was shirtless and crawling in gravel beside the street. One officer grabbed the man from behind without identifying himself and commanded, "Hands behind your back." The man reacted by kicking the officer 2 or 3 times. After officers handcuffed the man, they repeatedly contorted his arms behind his back, pulled up on them, and thrust them into the air as he cried out, "You're hurting me, stop it." While continuing to pull his arms, the first officer retorted, "You know what else hurts? Getting kicked." At times, officers repeatedly use force to punish a handcuffed person. In one incident, 2 officers pressed on a man's head, neck, and body because the man mocked the weight of a female officer. The man had threatened to assault someone, and officers tackled and handcuffed him after he refused their commands to stop walking away. While handcuffed on his stomach, the man complained of the weight of a female officer put on his legs and called her a, quote, fat bitch. She laughed and said, "Okay, I can do this," and pressed harder on his legs. Another officer then shoved his body weight onto the man's neck and shoulders and asked, "Want me to take you out of these handcuffs and we'll do it all over?" Later, while officers searched him, the man complained about the officer's actions, and spittle flew from his mouth onto an officer's face. The man immediately apologized, but the officer grabbed him by the hair and slammed his head into the patrol vehicle. Officers then threw the man onto the ground and applied the hobble restraint, connecting his leg restraints to his handcuffs behind his back. All the while, the man did not resist. Number 3, Phoenix PD's training and weak oversight contribute to the pattern of excessive force. Phoenix PD training has mischaracterized the law and encouraged immediate and indiscriminate force, which predictably results in excessive force. Many of the problematic practices we saw originated with Phoenix PD training. Despite systems for oversight and review, Phoenix PD's chain of command approved nearly all use of force incidents, including those described above. I thought I was on vertical. Let me try something. How about, is this better? Whoa. Or is that worse? including all of these were approved, including those described above. Phoenix PD training encourages officers to use unjustified force. So what we're looking at, guys, is these titles are the findings, like the major findings, and then the paragraphs obviously are the details about the findings. So just keep that in mind. The bolded titles are actual findings of the DoJ report, things that have been found to be true. Phoenix PD's training has explicitly encouraged officers to use force when there is no legal justification to do so. We reviewed hundreds of lesson plans and PowerPoints, interviewed members of Phoenix PD's training bureau, and personally attended dozens of hours of classroom and scenario-based training in Phoenix. Under the Fourth Amendment, police may use reasonable force against immediate threats, not speculative risks. Excuse me. Phoenix PD has trained officers to observe what trainers call safety priorities. A hierarchy that begins with 1. Hostages, 2. Innocents, 3. Law enforcement, and 4. Suspects. Phoenix PD teaches officers to prioritize the safety of hostages and innocents even when the risk of harm is only theoretically possible. In several trainings we observed, instructors directed officers to use force against an isolated person because bystanders like me might show up. Innocents can pop out of nowhere. Phoenix PD also trained officers to use serious force to respond to hypothetical, not actual danger. For example, in a training for all supervisors at a station, Phoenix PD showed a video of an incident in which an officer shot a man carrying a knife with a 40mm round. Although the man was on a deserted street in downtown Phoenix at 2:45 a.m., trainers said the force was reasonable because there was, quote, an element of jeopardy. The jail was across the street and people, quote, could be released anytime. Trainers have also taught officers to fire tasers and 40mm projectiles against a person in a behavioral health crisis if the person does not comply with commands, whether or not the person presents a threat. The mindset that a theoretically possible future threat, however unlikely, justifies immediate force. The mindset that a theoretically possible future event, however unlikely, justifies immediate force violates the Fourth Amendment. Phoenix has trained its officers that all force, even deadly force, is de-escalation. This attitude runs contrary to the basic principles of de-escalation, which offer strategies such as time, distance, cover, and verbal persuasion to help a person voluntarily comply with officers without the need to use force or lessen the force needed. Phoenix PD officers have been trained to use escalation to de-escalate the situation as quickly as possible. One trainer suggested immediate force stops a situation before you really have to hurt someone, and explained that de-escalation, like talking nice, will get someone killed. I want to say that again. One trainer suggested immediate force stops a situation before you really have to hurt someone, and explained that de-escalation, like talking nice, will get someone killed. In practice, this translates to quickly using unreasonable force, often without considering whether any force is necessary at all. Indeed, in some trainings we observed, trainers encouraged officers to use force without warning or just seconds after arriving at a scene, regardless of whether the person presented an apparent risk to officers or others. Well, we got a road rage. Hold on. I'm not involved. I'm just... sorry. Regardless of whether the person presented an apparent risk to officers or others. Trainers have stressed that officers must avoid, quote, paralysis by analysis. They must not hesitate or overthink, but act quickly to use less lethal weapons. To be sure, the use of a less lethal weapon may be necessary and appropriate to resolve a dangerous situation without the need without the need for greater force. But Phoenix PD must teach officers to use force only when reasonable under the Constitution. Instead, Phoenix PD trainers have featured unreasonable force as good de-escalation in training settings. In one Phoenix PD video used to train 40mm operators, a Phoenix PD officer shot a 40mm impact round at a man standing directly in front of a toddler in a crib. When someone in the training expressed concern that the toddler could have been struck had the officer missed the target, the trainer responded that the deployment was, quote, one of the best executions of the safety priorities, and the only room for improvement was to fire the projectile sooner. Our review of force incidents demonstrate the prevalence of this mindset. In a training we observed, Phoenix PD taught officers that when people do not immediately comply with commands, officers can use force to make them. For instance, if a person suspected of a low-level misdemeanor asks why they are being detained and does not sit down when told, Phoenix PD has taught that using force to make them sit down is a proper response. We've all seen that. And if a person's body naturally tenses in response to being grabbed, that is active resistance, which justifies greater force, including using chemical spray, wrapping arms around a person's head, tackling a person, or putting pressure on their neck. Similarly, Phoenix PD has taught officers that it is appropriate to fire projectiles at people who are not following commands but pose no threat. Indeed, 40mm operators have been trained that they can fire when faced with, quote, passive resistance, such as when a person is defiant in response to commands but not aggressive. For example, in a role-playing training we observed, officers stopped a driver on suspicion of assault. The actor got out of his car with his hands up but did not follow the trainee's directions and was moving around and yelling. Eventually, the trainee shot the actor with a 40mm round. During the debrief, instructors told the trainee that he should have taken more decisive action and fired the moment the actor did not comply with the command. I can't even believe some of the stuff I'm reading, you guys. I also want to point out that all of these departments, all of these unions, all of these officers, they all have the same trainings, the same training programs, the same certifications. Keep that in mind. Other trainings highlight incidents in which officers use excessive force as exemplary behavior. For example, for a training on firing 40mm impact rounds, Phoenix PD provided several examples of what the agency considered effective 40mm deployment. This included the incident described on page 27 above, in which a group of officers deployed 2 40mm impact rounds, a taser, and over 20 pepper ball rounds at an unarmed man within 20 seconds of announcing their presence. 2 40mm impact rounds, 1 taser, and over 20 pepper ball at an unarmed man within 20 seconds of announcing their presence. Phoenix PD released a department-wide video that featured video of the incident described on page 97 below, in which Phoenix PD officers fired pepper balls at a man in a behavioral health crisis less than 2 minutes after arriving on scene. The man had not hurt or touched anyone and was not armed, and officers had been advised before their arrival that he was beginning to calm down. B. Phoenix PD officers fail to report significant force. So everything we've seen is just what's been reported, right? And known already. We can only imagine what has not been reported, what is not known. Phoenix PD sets a high threshold for reporting use of force. As described above, many leg or neck restraints require no use of force report at all. To understand the scope of underreporting, we reviewed a random sample of incidents in which it was conceivable that officers used force, but no force report was filed. such as incidents in which people were arrested for, quote, resisting arrest. In a significant number of these incidents, officers used force but never reported it, either because policy did not require it or because the officers mischaracterized what occurred, i.e., lied. Just say it, DOJ. Look up, hey Siri, what's a synonym for mischaracterized? In one case, officers failed to report force that was so aggressive that bystanders like me objected. 2 officers responded to a call from a hotel that a former employee was breaking items in the breakfast area. An employee pointed the man out, who was by then talking on his cell phone while patrons ate their breakfast. When he saw the officers walk toward him, he put his hands up and said he would leave, saying, "Please don't touch me." One officer responded, quote, "No, you're going to get touched." They grabbed the man around the neck and forced him to the ground. They held him on the ground and handcuffed him as he screamed and as hotel staff and guests questioned the officer's actions. Consistent with Phoenix PD policy, the officers did not report the force. Again, consistent with Phoenix PD policy, the officers did not report the force. Here's a nice photo here, if you can see that, guys. Unreported neck restraint. The use of dangerous neck restraints or compression holds evades supervisory review because Phoenix PD considers these practices to be, quote, soft, empty hand control and restraining devices, which are not subject to supervisory review. For example, supervisors never reviewed an incident where an officer held a teenager by the neck while handcuffing him. The teen's mom had called police complaining that her son, who was having a manic episode, had stolen her phone. As the teen swore at the officers and told them he was recording with his phone, officers grabbed him, took away his phone, and said, "You are making stupid decisions." No, unfortunately, I think the mother made a stupid decision in trusting that Phoenix PD would help her. The teen remained seated but kept talking, so one officer grabbed him by the neck and applied pressure for approximately 15 seconds, as shown in the image below. Imagine being this kid's mom, thinking that you're going to help him, thinking that you're calling the best of our community to come help your son who's having a mental issue that you're not capable of dealing with. How bad does she feel after they choke him out or whatever they did to him? 15 seconds of choking him, the officers did not report the force. This picture is captioned, "The officer held the teenager by the neck for approximately 15 seconds but completed no use of force report." C. The lack of meaningful supervisory review validates and reinforces unlawful practices. Supervisors provide little oversight of officers' use of force practices. Phoenix PD requires the chain of command to review certain types of force incidents, such as canine bites, taser, and 40mm deployments, punches, and kicks. Beginning in 2020, Phoenix PD also required supervisors to review incidents in which officers point their firearms at people. Only in 2020 were they even recording how many people they point a loaded gun at. We found that supervisors failed to scrutinize the force used or the officer's tactics. At times, Phoenix PD supervisors even validate unlawful practices. As a result, unconstitutional behavior continues unabated. We need more baiters in there. Get the baiters. More baiting. Supervisors' use of force reports are perfunctory and boilerplate. So they just copy-paste the same bullshit on every use of force report. Supervisors are required to evaluate whether force was reasonable and check a series of boxes to confirm the force complied with policy. They do not interview people involved in use of force incidents, whether witnesses or the subject of the use of force. We saw little evidence that supervisors considered the totality of officer tactics, such as in engaging in risky foot pursuits of people suspected of low-level offenses. And we also saw incidents in which supervisors involved in the use of force conducted the supervisory review. thereby reviewing their own actions. Many use of force incidents do not receive even cursory supervisory reviews. Most reported force consists of soft, empty hand techniques, which is tracked but not reviewed. These techniques can include placing pressure to a person's face and neck, pushing someone's nose with an officer's hand, and wrapping arms around a person's shoulder or neck, and then using a knee to force their legs to buckle. Officers often use these techniques to inflict considerable pain, yet Phoenix PD requires no supervisory review. Phoenix PD supervisors determined that 98.7 and 99.4% of force incidences complied with policy in 2021 and 2022 respectively. Just about all of them, in other words. In 2 years, just about all over 98 and 99% of all forces complied with policy per supervisors. Our review showed that Phoenix PD officers use unreasonable force in a significant share of incidents. Indeed, Phoenix PD supervisors approved nearly every force incident that we described above. And every incident in which an officer reported pointing a gun at a person, 6,013 in 2021 and 22 combined, was found to be reasonable and within policy. Phoenix PD's failure to meaningfully review force incidents validates and reinforces unconstitutional practices. Phoenix PD's unconstitutional practices inflict additional harm on family members already distraught over a loved one's injury or death at the hands of the officers. One family watched their son's final moments on police video and saw officers pelt their child with impact rounds, then send a police dog to drag his body. Other families learned that officers were slow to render aid or delayed paramedics from reaching their loved ones. Families also shared their frustration with how the city and Phoenix PD treated them following a shooting. Some are still waiting years later to recover their family members' possessions. These families told us they organized in the hope that they can prevent what happened to them from happening to someone else. A family member told us, quote, we're trying to have faith, but I don't have much faith anymore. Page 41B. Phoenix PD and the city violate the rights of people experiencing homelessness. We have reasonable cause to believe that Phoenix PD violates the rights of people experiencing homelessness in two ways. First, Phoenix PD stops, detains, and arrests people who are homeless without reasonable suspicion that they are engaged in criminal activity. Second, the city and Phoenix PD seize and destroy property belonging to people who are homeless without providing adequate notice or opportunity to collect their belongings. A person's constitutional rights do not diminish when they lack shelter. These practices violate the due process requirements of the 14th Amendment and the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment's prohibition on unreasonable seizures. To evaluate the city and Phoenix PD's practices, we rode with and interviewed officers about their views on homelessness and policing in Phoenix. We reviewed a random sample of incidents from Phoenix PD units whose focus is policing homeless people. We reviewed body-worn video camera. We also scoured city reports on the destruction of property belonging to homeless people. We toured shelter and service facilities and observed cleanups of homeless encampments. We talked to city prosecutors, defense attorneys, and officials responsible for the city's homelessness programs. Finally, we spoke with dozens of unhoused people about their experiences in Phoenix and with homeless advocates. Number 1, homelessness in Phoenix. Homelessness plays a heavy burden on Phoenix resources, including public and emergency health systems. Over the last decade, the number of homeless people who cannot find shelter anywhere has nearly tripled. Of the nearly 7,000 unhoused people in Phoenix in 2023, almost half were unsheltered. Over 3,000. Until late 2023, a large concentration of Phoenix's unhoused population lived in a downtown outdoor encampment known as the Zone. Because there were not enough shelter beds in the city, hundreds of unhoused people camped in the Zone on the streets surrounding Phoenix's largest shelter. At its zenith in 2022, the zone held over 1,000 people sheltering in tents and under tarps. If you're a local, you know the zone pretty well, probably. It's no longer there, I don't think. Phoenix PD contributed to funneling unhoused people into the zone. Phoenix PD heavily policed unhoused people throughout the city, and officers repeatedly told people they could not sleep outside the zone. At the same time, officers made clear to unhoused people that they would receive a reprieve from such enforcement if they relocated to the zone. But the zone was not a safe place to live. Paramedics would not respond to emergencies in the zone without police escort. People in the zone reported 30 rapes during 2021-2022. A dead fetus, estimated to be between 20 and 24 weeks old, was found in the street in 2022. In March 2023, a man was beaten, thrown into a dumpster, and set on fire. One Phoenix PD commander told a reporter that the zone was an environment that attracts people who want to prey on those individuals that are at the lowest point in their lives. Meanwhile, lawsuits in state and federal court pressured the city and Phoenix PD to change their approach to people experiencing homelessness. In October 2022, local property owners sued in state court, claiming the zone had become a public nuisance and was hurting business. 1 month later, a group of unhoused people and local advocates sued in federal court, claiming the city and Phoenix PD were violating the constitutional rights of homeless people inside and outside the zone. The federal court issued a preliminary injunction prohibiting the city and Phoenix PD from seizing or disposing a homeless person's property without notice and from enforcing laws preventing camping or sleeping in public, quote, against persons with no practical recourse to housing. In March 2023, the state court declared the zone a public nuisance and ordered the city to clear it of tents. To its credit, the city accelerated efforts to relocate many of the zone's unhoused residents to shelters and temporary housing. The city received an amendment to the federal injunction, allowing it to move people to a new sanctioned outdoor shelter area with restrooms. By November 2023, the city had closed the zone to overnight camping and provided shelter to 585 people who had been living there. Other residents dispersed and moved to small encampments scattered throughout the city. Homelessness residents make up more than 37% of all arrests, but less than 1% of all Phoenix residents are homeless. Look at that, their group of arrests. The red people are homeless, right? Who've been arrested, and now just the full population. That's insane. There's no way that you know, 37%. That's what we're paying for, guys. We're paying for police to hassle homeless people in Phoenix. I want 37% of arrests to be like rapes and scam calls against our elders. That's what I want 37% of. The city has established a number of programs related to homelessness. In 2017, the city established the Community Action Response Engagement Services Program, or Phoenix Cares, to address citizen complaints and help people access city services. Since 2021, the city has been allocated nearly $100 million in federal grants to support programs and address homelessness. In 2022 and 2023, the city added 1,072 shelter beds. This year, the city has proposed a new shelter to open this summer. What's that? Last year, people experiencing. Even with the additional proposed beds, some people will be unable to find shelter. To homelessness and Phoenix PD. Policing homeless people has been a central pillar of Phoenix PD's enforcement strategy. Yeah, we see that from the 37%. Between January 2016 and March 2022, patrol officers logged over 370,000 hours on nearly 500,000 trespassing calls. The number of hours spent on trespassing is likely an undercount, as officers do not consistently record all trespassing activity. Phoenix PD's public policy is to lead with services, and this stated policy has encouraged officers to make referrals, not arrests. But between January 2016 and March 2022, people who were homeless accounted for over 1/3, 37% of all Phoenix PD misdemeanor arrests and citations. One unhoused man came into contact with Phoenix PD 97 times between 2016 and 2022. Only I got numbers that higher than that. And was arrested or cited at least 20 times. Okay, he beat me there. Between 20... See, that's just bad effectiveness. 97 times, but they only cited him or arrested him 20? Priorities, guys, priorities. Can't even... It's like, what are you even bothering him for? You only get him like every fifth visit? Officers frame many of these encounters as outreach to people experiencing homelessness, but they check for warrants, search belongings, and make clear that people are not free to leave. They're not actually helping anyone, and if they are helping you, they're trying to arrest you before that or while they're doing that. In fact, Phoenix PD has dedicated several squads to this purpose. The squads start their shift before dawn by conducting rounds, which means waking sleeping people, running their names for warrants, and ejecting them from sidewalks, parks, alleys, dirt areas, and canals. Interim Chief Sullivan told us he believes police should have limited involvement when it comes to homelessness. It's not a crime. But the city has chosen Phoenix PD officers as a primary response to address the homelessness crisis, leading to a pattern of violations we described above. 3. Phoenix PD detains, cites, and arrests homeless people in violation of the Fourth Amendment. Phoenix PD's approach to policing homeless people violates the Constitution. Police officers can engage in voluntary contacts with community members, but contacts become seizures when people are no longer free to go. Remember that, guys. Police officers can engage in voluntary contacts with community members, but contacts become seizures under the Fourth Amendment when people are no longer free to go. Under the Fourth Amendment, officers may only detain people for investigative purposes if they possess reasonable suspicion of criminal activity that is, quote, individualized. This is from City of Indianapolis v. Edmond, 2000, and Terry v. Ohio. An officer must have, quote, specific articulable facts which, together with objective and reasonable inferences, form the basis for suspecting that a particular person detained is engaged in criminal activity. Without reasonable suspicion, a person, quote, may not be detained, even monetarily. Florida v. Royer. We found that Phoenix PD often stops unhoused people for investigative purposes without reasonable suspicion. Officers initiate these stops based on indications the person is homeless, even when they are lawfully present on city property. These stops are particularly coercive when officers detain unhoused people early in the morning while they are merely resting or sleeping on public property. These stops sometimes lead to unlawful citations, often for discretionary misdemeanor offenses like obstructing an alley. Officers frequently lack a lawful basis to detain homeless people. Often, the unlawful stops seem to serve solely as a pretext for officers to demand a person's identification and check for outstanding warrants. But police violate the Fourth Amendment when they detain a pedestrian to check his license without any evidence that the person is engaged in a crime. In one incident, an officer stopped his squad car when he saw a man who appeared to be homeless balancing his belongings while riding a bicycle in an alley. Although the officer had no basis to suspect criminal activity, he stopped the man to check for warrants anyway. Sometimes, officers justify their detentions by falsely claiming people are obstructing sidewalks or alleys. The Phoenix City Code broadly prohibits, quote, obstruction or interference of public property, and obstruction of a sidewalk or alley means the person's presence impedes traffic. That's from the Phoenix City Code, section 23-9. But we often saw officers stop unhoused people who were not obstructing anyone's access and were sometimes even taking care to stay out of the way. In a 2023 incident, Phoenix PD illegally detained 2 people for sitting in the shade, well off to the side of an alley. Neither person was impeding traffic. They were sitting on large chunks of concrete too heavy to move. Still, the officers cited them for lying or sitting on a public right-of-way. One officer explained, "Try not to be hanging out in alleys, otherwise you're going to see PD quite a bit." Officers also routinely detained unhoused people in the pre-dawn hours after waking them and to run warrant checks, then ordering them to move. Like the stops described above, these are not voluntary encounters. Our review demonstrates the purpose of these encounters is not to assist homeless people, to offer them services or support, or to intervene due to a medical emergency. Without suspicion of a crime, officers roust people sleeping on public property, demand their identification, detain them to ask questions unrelated to their welfare, and tell them to move. Such encounters are coercive, unnecessary, and routinely lead to constitutional violations. Thanks for sticking with me, guys. Taking a quick break here. In Phoenix, sleeping in public by itself cannot be illegal if a person has no means to access shelter. Since 2019, sleeping on public property has been constitutionally protected under Martin v. Boise, in which the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals held that criminal punishment for a person's unavoidable lack of shelter violates the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. Makes sense, right? You cannot punish a homeless person criminally if they have no recourse for homelessness. That's cruel. Again, guys, I'm trying to keep my personal comments to a minimum. It's really hard. And in 2022, a federal district court in Arizona ordered the city to cease enforcement of laws that penalize sitting, standing, or sleeping on public property. As the court explained, practically speaking, this threat of being stopped and cited by officers is also hardship because it creates a sense of fear and instability among the city's most vulnerable residents through no fault of their own. But we found that Phoenix PD officers continue to detain unhoused people for no reason other than they are sleeping in public. Without suspicion of a crime, these early morning detentions are unlawful. In a 2023 incident, after the injunction, officers woke a group of people and told them, "You're being detained because we don't know who you are and you're camping." One woman said she thought they were okay to be in this area because their tent was not blocking the alley. An officer told her the alley is made for city use. It's not even supposed to be walked through. As a person, you're not supposed to walk through an alley. In another incident from 2020, officers woke a 55-year-old man and 51-year-old woman at 4:55 a.m. They were sleeping on the sidewalk under blankets, leaving plenty of room for foot traffic, though there was no one else present other than police. One officer told the man, "Sir, you understand that you can't be sleeping on a sidewalk in the city of Phoenix?" Phoenix PD ran warrant checks, commanded them to leave the area, and told the woman, "I need you to get up and get moving though, dear." The U.S. Supreme Court the U.S. Supreme Court took the U.S. Supreme Court took up the issue in 2024 and will determine whether punishing a person for sleeping outdoors, whether they have nowhere to go, is cruel and unusual under the Eighth Amendment. Okay, so Yeah, they haven't done that yet. Regardless of any future Supreme Court ruling, the law in Phoenix has been clear since 2019 that without more, Phoenix PD officers lack reasonable suspicion to stop people from merely sleeping on public property when they have nowhere else to sleep. Phoenix PD was required to adhere to this law, and it did not. So they're saying even though the Supreme Court has not fully ruled on the appeal of that it's unconstitutional to stop a homeless person from sleeping on the sidewalk in public because although they have no recourse, even though that's still in the Supreme Court works, Phoenix, the city of Phoenix themselves came up with a law that said that you're not supposed to be making basically the act of homelessness itself be illegal. And they still didn't abide by their own rule. Officers cite or arrest homeless people without a lawful basis. Is there no end to the harassment of homelessness? To the harassment of homeless? 69-year-old man detained for sleeping. Phoenix PD's practice of illegally waking people up and detaining them for sitting or lying on public property leads to unlawful citations and arrests. In the early mornings, officers cite or arrest homeless people for conduct that is plainly not a crime, such as sitting or lying down on public property or for trespassing on private property when they're on public sidewalk. For example, one 69-year-old man has accumulated multiple citations and arrests for sitting or sleeping on public property. In 2017, officers arrested him for loitering in a closed park. He had been sleeping under a blanket, using his backpack for a pillow. In 2021, officers again found the man wrapped up in a blanket, sleeping upright in a canal. The officers instructed him to move through a rocky area in the dark, and he tripped and fell. While officers ran his name through a warrant check, the man asked, "Is there no end to the harassment of the homeless?" An officer responded, "Is there no end to the trespassing or the obstructing?" The officers laughed. The other officers laughed. The man said, "I quietly leave in the morning." Phoenix PD cited him for a third-degree trespassing, then told him to get back to his blanket and backpack. Just go in there and get your belongings. Get your trash. The charges were, quote, a little bit iffy. Sometimes, when people attempted to leave these unlawful stops, Phoenix PD officers used force to detain them. Phoenix PD officers tried to detain a man for trespassing in 2020, and when he questions their authority to stop him, they grabbed him, knelt on his neck, and fired a taser at him. The officers stopped the man outside a convenience store where he was talking to two women. Though no one had called the police, they demanded his identification and told him that he might be trespassing. The man explained that no one had asked him to leave the store, and when an officer threatened to arrest him, the man backed away, complained the officers were out of order, and again said that he had not committed a crime. Officers followed him, grabbed him, and forced him to the ground. One officer placed his knee and later his forearm on the man's neck. Another officer tased him. The officers arrested the man for resisting arrest and trespassing. Though one acknowledged those charges were, quote, a little bit iffy. Here it is, the line, guys. Prosecutors declined to prosecute the charges. Some officers seem to have gotten the message that citing homeless people is a priority. One officer told a group of unhoused people, "You guys need to find somewhere that's sustainable. Like, not alleys, not parks, nothing like that, because we're cracking down on that stuff." We heard an officer on the bike squad, a squad dedicated to walking and moving homeless people, say on body-worn camera that he needed to write a trespassing citation because I got to get my tickets up this month. In another incident, a different bike squad officer said he needed to write a trespassing citation because this puts me at 30. In 2022, the bike squad received a commendation for their arrest record the year before. In another incident, an officer warned a woman that she needed to leave the alley and not come back. "Then if I find you in the alley again, I'm gonna arrest you." Which I hate to do that. That's stupid, right? Just for being in the alley? But I have to. No, you don't. Officers abuse trespassing laws to unlawfully detain people experiencing homelessness. I'll throw in cop watchers and all other manner of bystanders as well. These trespassing laws are out of off the chain, off the hook, off the chisane. Phoenix PD also cites people for misdemeanor trespassing, claiming that they are on private property when they are not. In one early morning incident, officers issued unlawful trespassing citations to a man and woman sleeping in the dirt under a tarp. Officers claim that in their report that the property belongs to ADOT, Department of Transportation, which had an authority to arrest on file with Phoenix PD. But the officers were unsure who owned the location where the people were sleeping, even after several minutes of riding their bikes around the property and consulting their maps. Having come to no consensus, the officer said, "Who knows?" and wrote the citation. In February 2018 and February 2019, Phoenix PD issues bulletins reminding officers that they need to have reasonable suspicion to detain a person for trespassing or require them to provide identification. Phoenix PD also reminded officers that they cannot detain someone just to issue a trespass warning. That's great to know. Phoenix PD also reminded officers that they cannot detain someone just to issue a trespass warning. Thank you, Department of Justice. But we found many instances where officers stopped and held people without reasonable suspicion. I think, guys, hold on, and only then tried to determine whether they might be trespassing. Guys, I just got a business idea. You read this report thoroughly and you study it, and you can literally exploit these trainings and processes of Phoenix PD and cash in on some settlements. I'm not even joking. If I didn't have a job, I would be spending all day, every day in Phoenix cop watching, waiting for them to violate my rights. Think of all the millions of dollars in settlements all these people, there's been basically no convictions against all these people who are, especially these homeless people who are violated. They're not even criminals in the end. They don't even get convictions. Anyway, read this report and study it, and you can exploit it for litigation. That's actual real legal advice. You can put me on the record. Who knows? For example, officers check to see if a property has an authority to arrest on file with Phoenix PD after they have already detained homeless people. Phoenix PD encourages officers to help property owners obtain authority to arrest documentation, which permits Phoenix PD to cite or arrest people for trespassing on private property without contacting the owner. In one pre-dawn example, officers roused a woman sleeping in the dirt on public property between a fence and the street. The dirt was approximately 3 feet wide, next to a business with no paved sidewalk separating it from the street. Only after holding the woman by the side of the road for about 6 minutes did officers determine no authority to arrest existed. Instead, they cited her for obstructing public areas, although she was not preventing anyone from using the area, and told her to pack up her belongings and move. Citations, often given in lieu of arrest, require a person to appear in court. If the person does not do so, the court issues a warrant for failure to appear, which leads to arrests and time in jail. City officials and people experiencing homelessness told us that getting to court is challenging, and bench warrants are commonplace for these situations. Phoenix PD told us that they rely on prosecutors to tell them if there are issues related to their trespassing enforcement. In practice, however, this information rarely reaches prosecutors or any judicial adjudication at all. The courts and city prosecutors review only a small fraction of Phoenix PD's trespassing charges because most people in custody plead guilty or are quickly released. When city prosecutors do look at trespassing charges, they decline to prosecute nearly 96% of them. The high rate of declination? Why does that word look so weird to me? Declination. The high rate of declination may indicate that officers lack the necessary probable cause to cite people for trespassing, or that pursuing the matter in court was not worth the resources. But when we asked the Phoenix PD commander in charge of the shelter and street squads whether Phoenix PD had reconsidered the practice of waking people up, he told us, "We're still going to wake people up to arrest them." 4. The city and Phoenix PD seize and dispose of property of homeless people in violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments. The city and Phoenix PD's strategy for policing the homeless population extends to seizing and destroying their personal property without due process. Sometimes this practice occurs following the illegal detentions described above. Other times it results from a joint effort between Phoenix PD and other city agencies to clean up encampments, usually with help from Phoenix PD officers. People experiencing homelessness do not lose 4th Amendment property rights to their belongings, even if they leave them temporarily unattended on the sidewalk. The government cannot seize and destroy those belongings without affording the owner due process. That's Levon v. City of Los Angeles. That means the government must take reasonable steps to give notice that the property has been taken so the owner can pursue available remedies for its return. Before destroying property, the government must provide adequate notice of its intent to clean up areas where the property may be seized, inventory property present, and store the property so that people may try to retrieve their belongings. The city and Phoenix PD failed to follow these constitutional requirements. Until 2022, they routinely destroyed property without adequate notice or process during cleanups at the zone. And throughout the city, they continued to destroy property during cleanups organized through the Phoenix Cares program or during officers' day-to-day encounters with homeless people. We watched these practices on body-worn camera video, saw them firsthand, and found them in Phoenix PD officers and city employees' own reports. In 2022 and 2023, the city and Phoenix PD updated its policies to require more process before throwing away a person's belongings. The new policies failed to achieve constitutional requirements. Wow. Hold on. In 2022 and 2023, the city and Phoenix PD updated policies to require more process before throwing away a person's requirements. But the new policies failed to achieve constitutional requirements. They tried to update their rules about throwing shit away, and they were still not constitutional after trying to make it constitutional. Guys, dozens of unhoused people have spoken to us about losing property they needed for survival, such as clothing, tents, medication, and identification. They also spoke of losing property of immense personal value, including family photographs, correspondence, and according to one man's account, an urn containing a family member's ashes. That looks like it's unconfirmed, but I believe it. Seizure and destruction of property in the zone. As described above, Phoenix closed the zone in the fall of 2023. But from October 2022 to January 2022, the city's cleanup operations in the zone routinely resulted in constitutional violations. These cleanups, conducted 3 times a week, required significant city resources, including an entire police squad, multiple outreach workers, multiple city employees, and various city contractors. Starting at 5 a.m., Phoenix PD officers would drive block by block, using patrol sirens and loudspeakers to warn residents they had to move and that anything left behind will be considered abandoned property. If you're looking to downsize, now's a good time to do it. Phoenix PD officers would then cordon off a block at a time so city employees could dispose of all property and trash. While observing these cleanups, Justice Department investigators saw workers throw away a tent, tarp, duffel bag, purse, and sleeping bag, among other things. When each block was clear, residents were free to push, carry, or drag their property back to their assigned area, reassemble their tents, and unpack their belongings. During one cleanup we observed, an officer asked people moving their property if they were familiar with the concept of, quote, minimalism. Despite public criticism of these practices, the city failed to provide legally adequate notice of cleanups to the people living in the zone. Until January 2022, the city posted no signs to explain the frequency and duration of the cleanups. Guys, we're going to take a break here, a very quick couple-minute break. Then I'm going to come back and do 10 more pages up to page 60. That'll get us close to about halfway of the total report. I wanted to go back over this part. Everybody who's local knows this. They were going out, what did it say, weekly? Okay, routinely. Oh, 3 times a week. These cleanups conducted 3 times a week required significant city resources, including an entire police squad, multiple outreach workers, multiple city employees, and various city contractors. Okay, they'd go out into the zone, which is this gigantic homeless encampment in the middle of Phoenix. And 3 times a week, they would just bulldoze everything. Literally just bulldoze everything. Throw everything in the dumpsters. And then they would drop the police line. And like it said, everybody would just go back and put all their stuff back. And it was this dumb cat and mouse game that was just wasting money, not helping anything. They were literally just throwing people's stuff away that weren't able to get to it in time. If you were able to get to your stuff in time and move it, you could move it while they were cleaning up and then just move it back into the zone when they were done. It was an embarrassment on this city. And I'm not talking about the zone. Alright guys, let me throw up a, I'll zoom way in. Hold on. Let's see if we can find a word. I can't find like a break, so let's do free. This zoom in means I'm on break. I'm just gonna stretch my legs for a little bit, get a drink. Give me about 5 minutes. Thank you for joining me. This is important to me, and it's important to keep on the record. We need to know what's going on. So I appreciate your time, and we'll come back, do another 10 pages or so. Excuse me. Let's try to smash out about 10 more pages. That'll get us to about halfway. And hopefully we'll get the rest of it done in the next few days. And once again, we're just doing this because the details of this report are extremely important. The city leaders, the police department at Phoenix, and the police unions are saying that this is a political witch hunt, that this is a farce, that this is just to enrich paid federal monitors that won't ever find Phoenix PD compliant because they just want to get paid. What you don't hear them saying is, no, we didn't do that. No, that's actually wrong. No, we don't treat homeless people that way. No, here's a bunch of records that show that we are using deadly force correctly. No, that page is wrong. That stat is wrong. You don't see them saying that. You don't see them disputing the facts. When asked about the facts on the day the report was released, they said we didn't have time to read it. Well, by God, I'm going to read every single word. I'm going to read every single word out loud. And I'm going to broadcast every single word. And I'm not going to accept anybody calling this a political witch hunt. This has nothing to do with politics. I'm daring anybody at Phoenix PD to dispute a single fact in this report. And I've said it last night. I don't want federal oversight in any police department either. Phoenix PD says they want to be a self-assessing, self-correcting department. I want that too. But they're been proven to be unable to do that. And to be the opposite of that. A I don't even know. A self-racketeering, self-sustaining, lawsuit. Yeah, it made them look. It made them look very dumb. They seem to be just against any sort of federal oversight whatsoever. Well, too dang bad. Let's get back into it. Page 51. For some homeless residents, the first notice they received was the sunrise announcement by Phoenix PD officers just before the cleanups began. People who failed to move their property sometimes lost everything. In one example, an officer told a man who had been slow to move his things that unless he moved away and allowed city workers to destroy his property, the officer would cite him for obstructing the cleanup. In another example, a 56-year-old man was late moving his property and told officers he was trying to move as fast as he could. This man, too, failed to move his... I lost my spot. This man, too, failed to move his belongings quickly enough. The officers cited him for failure to obey an order and shoplifting because among his possessions, the man had 2 milk crates bearing the name of a local dairy. Oh my God. What are they going to get him for next? Tearing the mattress thing? It's like, Jesus Christ. Shoplifting for the milk crates? That's like a... I didn't know that was a thing that actually happened outside of ridiculous humor, It's like... Around January 2022, the city and Phoenix PD changed their procedures for cleaning up the zone. Officers no longer forced residents to move their property. Instead, city staff and contractors cleaned around people's tents and belongings, resulting in fewer complaints. At the end of December 2022, the city created a protocol for impounding and storing property during cleanups. but these improvements were mostly limited to highly visible areas inside the zone. Elsewhere in the city, as described below, the practice of seizing and destroying property without due process continues. Seizure and destruction of property throughout the city. With Phoenix PD's assistance, the city has facilitated hundreds of encampment cleanups outside the zone, which has also resulted in unlawful destruction of unhoused people's property. The Phoenix Cares program was established to connect the community with services like encampment cleanups, shelters, and other resources for individuals and families experiencing homelessness. But it was largely evolved into a complaint-based response program that enables the unlawful seizure and destruction of property outside the zone. Community members can make complaints online about homeless activity and encampments in their neighborhoods, prompting law enforcement to respond with other city agencies. Phoenix PD and city officials then force unhoused people to leave the area and destroy property left behind. Prior to 2023, Phoenix had no policy to ensure unhoused people received notice of a cleanup or to determine whether they had abandoned their property. The city did not store property after seizing it, and it did not notify residents that their property had been taken, nor tell them how to get it back. Instead, the city destroyed all property it found at the encampments in the city. Phoenix PD officers play a critical role in the encampment cleanup program. Phoenix PD assigns officers to respond to city-identified hotspots for routine cleanups and outreach. For example, before weekly cleanups in the Sunny Slope neighborhood, Phoenix PD's bike squad makes its rounds with early morning wake-ups to expel homeless people from the area. Then, city workers arrive to clean up the remains of any encampments and dispose of property along with the trash. Phoenix PD also coordinates with the city's streets department. A streets department employee emails a list of places targeted for cleanup to Phoenix PD officers. The next morning, Phoenix PD officers drive to the locations to warn about the cleanup, if anyone is present. A few hours later, city staff arrive with a bulldozer, scoop up everything without regard to what the items are, and dump it all into a garbage truck. These efforts have resulted in the illegal seizure and destruction of property. Many people lost their only possessions. For example, during a ride-along in April 2022, a Justice Department investigator saw city workers throw away a tent, ice cooler, bedding, and shoes without providing notice. Someone had complained that an unhoused person was living in a tent in a dirt alleyway. In coordination with Phoenix PD officers, the city's streets department staff scooped up everything with a bulldozer and destroyed all the property. We were informed that this practice was routine. Indeed, we reviewed many case files that include photographs of the possessions taken and destroyed without notice. In December 2022, a federal court ordered the city to stop seizing unhoused people's property without notice. The court also required the city to maintain any seized property in a secure location for at least 30 days, absent an immediate threat to public health or safety. In 2023, the city created policies to provide 24-hour notice before cleanups to distinguish between property and trash and to store property. But even after the injunction and new policies were in place, we reviewed many cases in which city officials destroyed people's belongings without notice or the opportunity to reclaim them. Failure to impound property after arrest. In some instances, when Phoenix PD arrested people experiencing homelessness for trespassing or other minor violations, officers failed to collect and impound the people's personal property. Usually, when officers make an arrest, they collect all personal items so that the person may claim them upon release. We see this all the time, guys, with Gilbert PD, right? The plastic bag, they put their wallet and phone, and all the stuff just goes into the bag. Homeless people shouldn't be any different, but instead they literally just bulldoze all their shit and throw it into a garbage truck. It doesn't matter if it's trash, if it's their actual house being a tent, if it's their ice chest full of food. I'm here in Gilbert having the luxury of, if I get arrested, all my stuff goes into a nice plastic bag, right? Why is it different for them? The answer is it shouldn't be. But we saw officers forego this process entirely, forcing people to abandon their belongings on the street. People experiencing homelessness repeatedly told us they lost all their possessions after Phoenix PD arrested them. For example, officers abandoned the property of 7 people whom they illegally arrested for trespassing when they were sitting and sleeping along the edge of a wide public sidewalk. An officer roused the group by yelling, this right here is trespassing. You cannot be here, period. The officers took all 7 people into custody and tossed their personal property onto the sidewalk rather than impounding it. One woman pleaded, "Please, all my stuff is here. Everything. Please." An officer looked at the blankets and clothes and told the sergeant, "This is all junk. There's nothing." The sergeant agreed, and the officers left the property on the sidewalk. Unconstitutional detentions and property destruction harm people who are homeless. No DoJ. The city and Phoenix PD rightfully have an interest in maintaining public spaces in a clean and safe condition. I'll repeat that for the benefit of Phoenix. The city and Phoenix PD rightfully have an interest in maintaining public spaces in a clean and safe condition. But the punitive practices we saw have harmed the physical well-being and safety of unhoused people, making it more difficult for them to find stable housing or employment. A man told us that having his property thrown away most definitely made it harder to escape homelessness. People told us about belongings the city had thrown away: tents, blankets, clothes, phones, sleeping bags, identification, court documents, medical paperwork, food stamp cards, social security cards, birth certificates, and insulin. Basically, anything and everything you need to survive out here is taken, said one woman. Another woman missed her appointment for affordable housing vouchers because she was trying to keep her things from being thrown away. Just stop the drugs and do better, right? Just stop the booze and get a job, right? That was sarcasm if you're totally unaware somehow. Another told us she lost her birth certificate when the city threw away her tent, which made it impossible to get housing. Just give up, guys. Just give up, basically. You don't have a right to any stuff. You don't have a right to be anywhere in public. You don't have a right to sleep and be safe under a bush if you want. Just give the hell up. That was sarcasm if you're not aware. Others said they needed to ask friends to move their belongings if they could not be there for a sweep because they had work, a court appearance, a medical appointment, or some other need. Indeed, service providers told us that fewer people sought services on cleanup days. All the services screech to zero when Phoenix cleans up the zone. Crazy, right? People experiencing homelessness told us they feel harassed by the city's cleanups and detentions. One man we spoke to said officers threw out his belongings while saying, "You guys are trash, and this is trash." An unhoused woman told us that police are forgetting that we are part of the community. Another woman said, "I feel like I am a target. We are so afraid." I'm sorry, but you are a target, and I'm sorry you should be afraid. During our review of randomly selected incidents, we ran across body-worn camera video of the bike squad waking this same woman for trespassing on a city-owned dirt patch outside a homeless services center. "All we are trying to do is survive," said another woman, referring to the bike squad's frequent early morning patrols. She added, "I don't know where they want us. They don't want us here." Guys, these ladies aren't talking to the DoJ investigators. These are talking to the Phoenix PD on body cam. "All we are trying to do is survive," she said. "I don't know where they want us. They don't want us here." This isn't her ratting out Phoenix PD to the Justice Department. This is on body-worn camera. It really makes you wonder what's not on body-worn camera. Officers told people as much. One officer said, "You cannot sit, you cannot lie, you can't sleep. Go somewhere else." When asked where they should go, the officer said, "There's a lot of resources. So I don't buy that it's cold, it's rainy. You have a place to go. It's called a shelter." But we also saw officers cite people when they were sleeping outside shelters and soup kitchens waiting for facilities to open. One man woken outside a soup kitchen in the early morning told officers he would leave. In response, an officer said, "You're not free to go. You're under arrest. And if you try to leave, you're going to jail." So a guy is sleeping. I just want to go over this. A homeless guy is sleeping outside of a soup kitchen in the early morning hours, waiting for it to open probably, because that's where they tell them to go, to the shelters and soup kitchens. He's sleeping. He gets woken up because he's apparently not supposed to be there. But then the cop says, "You're not free to go. And if you try to leave, you're going to jail." We just have to take in what's happening here, guys. This is just one incident, right? Just one random incident with Phoenix PD. Really sad stuff. Phoenix is not alone in confronting the crisis of homelessness in our country. Cities understandably struggle to balance the needs of all their residents in creating safe, livable environments. Excuse me. For too long, however, Phoenix has given law enforcement the responsibility of addressing this complex social problem. Banishing homeless people from public spaces by unlawful means, destroying their property, and cycling them through the criminal justice system endlessly, added by me, the narrator, does not solve the problem or address its root causes. In Phoenix, it has led to a pattern of constitutional violations. Page 55. We'll do 5 more pages, guys, up to 60, and then we'll break. And then we'll break for the day. It looks like this will probably be 4 parts, maybe 3. Phoenix PD discriminates against Black, Hispanic, and Native American people when enforcing the law. We have reasonable cause to believe that Phoenix PD engages in racial discrimination in violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Safe Streets Act. These statutes prohibit police practices that have an unjustified disparate impact on grounds of race or national origin. Police practices that disproportionately affect Black, Hispanic, or Native American people are unlawful unless there is substantial, legitimate, non-discriminatory justification. So, just as a quick example, let's say there's a segregated town for whatever reason, economic segregation, and there's one neighborhood, and this is all around Mesa, all around Phoenix. Let's say there's one neighborhood and its population is mostly Black people, and across the street there's another neighborhood that's mostly Mexican people. It's not constitutionally legal for the police to focus more on the neighborhood with Mexican people, as an example, without what's called substantial, legitimate, non-discriminatory justification. So if these two neighborhoods are basically the same except for the people, you're not allowed to focus on one of the neighborhoods. And that should be, obvious. But that's the sort of that's the spirit of the law that they're violating. As we've described in Section B of this report, Phoenix PD's enforcement strategy has focused on policing low-level violation, including quality-of-life offenses that often involve people who are homeless. This enforcement strategy also results in stark disparities in how officers treat Black, Hispanic, and Native American people. We conducted rigorous statistical analyses that ruled out causes other than discrimination for these disparities. We conducted rigorous statistical analyses that ruled out causes other than discrimination for these disparities. So there's ways in statistics to, I'm not even going to go there. Let's just continue. Phoenix PD uses race or national origin as a factor when enforcing traffic laws. This goes all the way back to Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Officers cite a disproportionate number of black and Hispanic drivers when compared to violations recorded by neutral traffic cameras in the same locations. Wow, see guys, this is fascinating. It's always difficult to get into statistics and race and stuff like that. But if you can take straight up objective traffic camera footage, you could compare that to what's happening and kind of see what's really going on. That's fascinating. Where does it say that again? When compared to violations recorded by neutral traffic cameras in the same locations. Fascinating. So you take a neutral traffic camera on a street corner and then you look at all the body camera footage from the police occurring in incidents at that same camera, and you go, wait a minute, the camera shows that like everybody's breaking these laws, but the body camera shows that only the black people are going down for it. I think that's what it's basically saying. Phoenix PD also enforces traffic laws more severely against black and Hispanic drivers than it does against white drivers engaged in the same behaviors. Phoenix PD enforces alcohol use offenses and low-level drug offenses more severely against black, Hispanic, and Native American people than against white people engaged in the same behaviors. This is all not news. I did not need a report for this. Phoenix PD enforces quality of life laws like loitering and trespassing more severely against black, Hispanic, and Native American people than it does against white people engaged in the same behaviors. Don't need a report for that. This disparate enforcement violates the law. Although it is whether officers treat people differently due in part to race or national origin, Phoenix departments to use enforcement data to evaluate whether officers treat people differently due in part to race or national origin. Phoenix PD does not do so. Does not use enforcement data to evaluate whether officers treat people differently due to race or national origin. They don't even care whether they're doing this. Phoenix PD did not ensure that officers, indeed, before we opened this investigation, Phoenix PD did not ensure that officers reported basic information about their enforcement activities, such as when they stopped people but did not make an arrest or issue a citation. Phoenix PD still does not require officers to collect data on searches that do not yield contraband. And even where Phoenix PD is aware of specific claims of officer bias, the agency fails to respond appropriately, mishandling or even ignoring complaints of overt discrimination. Phoenix PD engages in racially disparate law enforcement that harms black, Hispanic, and Native American people. The Constitution and federal law prohibit selective enforcement of the law based on race. Our review of Phoenix PD's data revealed that Phoenix PD cites and arrests black, Hispanic, and Native American people for low-level traffic, drug, alcohol, and quality of life offenses at rates disproportionate to their shares of the population. Phoenix PD officers respond to calls for service, but also engage in proactive policing, such as choosing to stop, cite, or arrest people. Bias can affect these decisions. Officers spend about 20% of their time on self-initiated enforcement. We focus on these self-initiated encounters involving low-level offenses because officers have a high degree of discretion in choosing whether or how to enforce the law in these areas. We found unexplained disparities based on race and national origin in Phoenix PD officers' enforcement of traffic laws, drug and alcohol laws, and quality of life offenses. Racial disparities are a clear sign that a police department must evaluate if officers are engaging in unconstitutional policing or if, as here, department-wide practices have unjustified disparate impact. When we performed rigorous analyses of Phoenix PD's enforcement to eliminate plausible race-neutral reasons for these disproportionate rates, we still found hold on, I'm going to start that again. I didn't quite catch that. When we performed rigorous analyses of Phoenix PD's enforcement to eliminate plausible race-neutral reasons for these disproportionate rates, we still found overwhelming statistical evidence that the racial and ethnic disparities in Phoenix PD's citations and arrests are due to discrimination. What exactly does that mean? That means that even after they tried to stop being racist, they were still racist? I think that's what... When we performed rigorous analysis of Phoenix PD's enforcement to eliminate plausible race-neutral reasons... Oh no, they're saying... They're saying they tried to explain this in some way other than racism, and they were unable to. They tried through statistical analysis to find some other reason why this wasn't racism. And it's just... The result of these studies were clear. Phoenix PD... Okay, forget all that. Here's the thing. The results of these studies were... Phoenix PD engages in discriminatory enforcement of traffic offenses. Everybody knows this. Phoenix PD has a long-standing community criticism that officers use race and national origin as a factor in their traffic... Hey! Literally, that's... The first thing I said was everybody knows that, and then look what the DoJ says. This sentence basically says everybody knows that. They started off the same way I did. Phoenix PD has faced long-standing community criticism that officers use race and national origin as a... They might as well just say everybody knows that. Community members echoed these concerns to Justice Department investigators. Officers spend over 1/4 of their time making traffic stops. In Phoenix PD, as in many police departments, officers have a great deal of discretion in this area. They are allowed to decide for themselves which drivers to stop and whether to warn, cite, or arrest drivers for violations they observe. When officers use race or national origin as a factor in deciding how to apply their discretion, they engender feelings of fear, resentment, hostility, and mistrust, particularly in Black, Hispanic, and Native American people. Our analysis of Phoenix PD's data validated the community's concerns. So, everybody knew that. And this one right here says, the first sentence, everybody knew that. This one is, and they were right. For instance, though Hispanic and white people make up roughly even shares of the Phoenix population, Phoenix PD cites or arrests Hispanic people for traffic equipment related offenses at 3 times the rate of white people. What's traffic equipment? Cars? Does that just mean traffic stops? What does that mean? For instance, though Hispanic and white people make up roughly even shares of... Okay, so there's as many whiteys as there is Hispanics. Phoenix cites or arrests Hispanic people for traffic equipment-related offenses at 3 times the rate. What's a traffic equipment? Lighting, probably? Headlights? This pattern holds when looking at specific low-level offenses. Phoenix PD cites or arrests Hispanic people 12 times as often as white people for improper tinting of windows, 7 times as often for improper license plate lights, and more than 8 times as often for squealing tires. Oh, so if I just would have kept reading. Black people, too, experience a disproportionate share of traffic equipment-related enforcement in Phoenix. Black people make up only 7.4% of Phoenix's population, but on a per capita basis, black people are cited or arrested 3 times as often as white people for traffic equipment-related offenses, including 4 times as often for improper license plate lights and 3 times as often for improper tinting of windows, and for having rear lights or reflectors that are not red. So there's no numbers around this. There's no numbers. There's no statistical way around saying that this is just straight up outright racism. There's no, oh, this population is this, so therefore this. No, there's no way around this. Per capita rates of enforcement for low-level offenses. Hispanics are the blue people, and the white people are the white people, who make up, by the way, the same share of population. So this should be 1 and 1 or 2 and 2. This should be the same. If police were stopping white people the same as Hispanic people, these would have the same number of people in each category. Right? I'm not a genius, but that's per capita, so there's no funny business with the numbers. It should be even. If it's not even, that means they're targeting Hispanic people. There's an unnatural number of blue people on those lines. Even when it comes to using bicycles rather than cars, Phoenix PD disproportionately cites and arrests black and Hispanic people compared to their shares of the population. Black people are cited or arrested more than twice as often as white people of speeding laws and other moving violations. Phoenix PD cites or arrests black and Hispanic people for speeding over 1.5 times more than it does for white people. For other moving violations, black people are cited or arrested at 1.6 times the rate, and Hispanic people almost twice the rate of white people. We also found disparities in Phoenix PD's enforcement of specific offenses. For example, black people are over 3.5 times more likely, and Hispanic people almost 4 times more likely than white people to be cited or arrested for failing to signal 100 feet before turning. Disparities. I got pulled over for that once actually, I was a passenger, and my driver got pulled over for that once for not turning a blinker on within 500 feet. So the ding-dong didn't even know the law. That was Phoenix Police Gang Squad. Or was it Chandler? No, I think it was Phoenix. I have very, very little interaction with Phoenix PD. Disparities like these in police enforcement can be caused by multiple factors and are not by themselves definitive proof of discrimination because of statistical numbers, right, and stuff like that. We designed 2 rigorous analyses to evaluate whether the disparities were due to factors other than race. In other words, we tried to prove that this is not racism. Violator study. First, to determine whether Phoenix PD officers engage in selective enforcement of the law in their traffic stops, we designed a violator study. In studying disparities in policing, violator studies have long been used by researchers to identify unwarranted racial disparities in traffic enforcement. We compared Phoenix PD data on officers' traffic stops to data from Phoenix traffic cameras, like I was talking about before. Traffic cameras offer a unique opportunity. This is exactly what I said before. Traffic cameras offer a unique opportunity for benchmarking or establishing a baseline against which to compare police enforcement. This is because these machines record traffic violations without regard to the race of the driver. Therefore, violations recorded by traffic cameras provide a benchmark to use when assessing the role of race in police officers' enforcement. You compare them. You see all the people doing the crimes on the traffic cam, and then you see all the people doing the crimes in the body cam, and you compare them. Simple. We use data collected by city red light and speeding cameras from 2016 through early 2020. We compared the rates at which speeding cameras detected violations to the rates at which Phoenix PD officers issued speeding tickets. To ensure we evaluated the same population of drivers, we compared only speeding citations officers had issued in locations close to each camera at a similar time of the day during the same period of the week, weekday versus weekend. So they controlled all this study to try to prove that it's this study is designed to try to prove that it's not racism, and they were not able to do that. We excluded and during the same month of the same year, we excluded speeding citations when the police recorded that the driver had committed an additional offense that could have been the primary reason for the stop, such as the improper use of a left turn lane. So they're only looking at speeding only. Next, we followed the same procedure when comparing violations found by individual officers to, or was it red lights? No, speeding. Yeah, speeding citations. Next, we followed the same procedure when comparing violations found by individual officers to violations detected by red light cameras, with one modification. Because the city had far fewer red light cameras than speeding cameras, we did not have enough data to reliably compare only police enforcement for running red lights. To rectify this, we compared violations detected by red light cameras to Phoenix PD officers' enforcement of low-level, non-speeding, moving traffic violations. So they didn't have enough red lights to compare red lights, so they added other small moving violations into red lights. To try and figure out what the hell is going on here. If Phoenix PD officers did not take race into account when deciding which drivers to ticket or arrest for speeding and low-level traffic violations, we would expect them to cite excuse me. We would expect them to cite or arrest drivers of all races at close to the same rate the cameras detect drivers in each group committing these violations. We talked about this. That is not what we found. Instead, Phoenix PD officers cite or arrest a significantly larger portion of black and Hispanic drivers than the race-neutral rates at which the cameras detected violations. Among drivers who speed near school zone speeding cameras, Hispanic drivers are 51% more likely to be cited or arrested by Phoenix PD officers compared to white drivers. So if there's 100 people cited for speeding near a school zone in one area, there will be 151 Hispanic people for the same thing. No, I don't think that's exactly the right way to explain it, but somebody remind me to stop talking about statistics. Among drivers who speed near school zone speeding cameras, black drivers are 90% more likely to be cited or arrested by Phoenix PD officers compared to white drivers. Among drivers who engage in low-level moving violations near red light cameras, Hispanic drivers are 40% more likely to be cited or arrested by Phoenix PD officers compared to white drivers. Among drivers who engage in low-level moving violations near red light cameras, black drivers are 144% more likely to be cited or arrested by Phoenix PD officers compared to white drivers. We'll get back to this at the end. We designed this analysis to rule out race-neutral reasons for Phoenix PD officers patrolling near the cameras at comparable times to detect a significantly higher proportion of black and Hispanic drivers violating the law than cameras do. These are statistically significant differences, and we ruled out all plausible race-neutral explanations for the difference between police enforcement and neutral enforcement by the cameras. The explanation for the differences is that Phoenix PD discriminates against black and Hispanic drivers. So they tried very hard in a very sound way, using math and statistics. They tried to give Phoenix the benefit of the doubt, and they set up this study in a way that they tried to prove that it's not racist, but it is. So for low-level moving violations, Black drivers are 144% more likely than whites to be cited. Hispanics are 40% more likely. For school zone speeding, blacks are 90% more likely than a white. And for Hispanics, 51% more likely than a white. That's kind of like the bottom line of the racial part of the study, I think, is that there it is. The explanation for the difference is that Phoenix PD discriminates against black and Hispanic drivers. Guys, that brings us to page 60. And it looks like this is a good place to stop. There's some more studies coming up. But let's try to keep this kind of pure. And I'll get out of here. Thanks for joining me. Come back later for the our regularly scheduled stream. We'll finish this up in the next couple days. I think it's important to know every single word in this report. Don't let them lie to you. Don't let them tell you that this is political. Don't let them tell you that this is Joe Brandon's Justice Department ran amok. There's nothing but facts in here. There's nothing but data, and there's no way that they can or will dispute any of it. They only have the witch hunt card to play, and I'm not going to let them play it. Thanks for watching. Love you guys. End stream. End stream, for real. End the stream, for real. How do I end the stream? Do you wish to end the stream? Yes. To confirm? Yes.